You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hello, my name is John Metzeler, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back, I hope, to this edition of Insights, a series which helps senior executives address challenges and stay informed about current issues ahead of market trends. The series is brought to you by the Conference Board, and today I'm sitting down again with Maria Velissariou. Welcome, Maria. Thank you for coming back to us. How are you? Still good?
Hi, John. Good to see you again. Great to be back.
And just to get us regrounded, this is part two of a duo of two sessions around the topic, the subject of ambidexterity. How do you become an ambidextrous leader in today's world? So critical in this world that I call it a VUCA on steroids, a world on fire, and it needs that ambidexterity, that perform and transfer capability of leaders, and it's so elusive in the world. And Maria has got some great experience in developing this, and some great skills and tips and insights to share to you, our audience. So in the first session, we talked about ambidextrous leadership, and that can often remain to leadership gobbledygook. Where we keep talking to ourselves, but so what happens with it? The challenge that leaders have is, how do you connect it with your organization? How do you create a culture of ambidexterity that brings your organization with you? And so that's what we're going to talk about in this second session. Before we go in there, let me just go and very quickly reground us also on who Maria is, for those who forgot, or maybe even only tune in to this to the second part. Maria is an R&D and science thought leader, and she specializes in guiding global ambidextrous organizations. And it's a longer bio. If you want to hear the full bio, go back to our first episode. But suffices to say that Maria was the global corporate R&D vice president and chief science officer for Mars Incorporated, where she was responsible for enterprise-wide approach to quality, food safety, and scientific regulatory affairs, and also delivery of Mars's R&D strategy in partnership with business segments. And I'm reinforcing that because you'll hear examples and illustrations that bring that responsibility to life. Now, before we jump into what an ambidextrous organization needs to be, let us go and do a very quick recap on the 5 key pillars that make up an ambidextrous leader. Maria, you want to go and rattle those off and to get our audience regrounded quickly?
Sure. Thanks, John. The first one is about thought leadership, broad thinking alongside the core functional aptitude. The second is about combining science and social meaning. The third is about being an agile problem solver, pivoting while taking intelligent risks. The fourth is championing diverse teams behind a unified purpose. And the last but not least is winning hearts and minds.
Excellent. And that covers, as we talked in our first session, that covers the full scope of leaders in terms of mind, heart, and gut, in terms of envisioning, enabling, and empowering and engaging. So with that grounding, let us go and start from like we did last time, the definition of ambidextrous leadership. How would you describe and summarize an ambidextrous organization then?
Let's start with a somewhat formal definition of organizational ambidexterity. It is really the capacity of an organization to be efficient in managing today's business and adapting to cope with tomorrow's changing demands. And just as being ambidextrous means being able to use both your left and your right hand equally, organizational ambidexterity requires the organization to use both exploration and exploitation techniques and approaches to be more successful. And an ambidextrous organization has the capacity for out-of-the-box creative thinking and executional excellence at the same time, which creates a really new mental model and a new way of operating.
So that's indeed sounds like a great summary of ambidexterity, and as you said, left and right hand coming together. And indeed, Alex Osterwalder calls this exploration and exploitation. I always like to talk performance transfer. Fundamentally, it's the same thing. As leaders and as frankly as organizations, even today, you need to be able to carry both. Now I know you have. We talked about the five key points, 5 key pillars for leadership. I know you developed 3 key pillars when it comes to taking that leadership into the organization, right? Which are your 3 pillars, Maria?
My first pillar is about understanding and internalizing the ever-changing landscape in supply and demand, things that are happening externally and internally. The second one is about the collision of traditional sciences with digital and data technologies that completely change the landscape of the scientific and technology domain. And the third one is agile R&D organizations.
So one is about the environment that we're living in today, the reality, embracing the reality of the environment, which is indeed, as we talked earlier, so unpredictable and volatile. The second is how do you then go and what do you do about it in terms of your science, your technologies, and then the third is how you bring your organization with you. So let's take the first one, and boy, indeed, supply and demand. Have we seen turmoil around that over first during the COVID period, and then of course with what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. So you want to talk a bit more about bring this to granularity in terms of how you have approached this in your business, and illustrate it where you can with stories.
Indeed, there are so many structural and cyclical drivers for what we experience today, notwithstanding the pandemic and geopolitics. Industry sectors are under increasing pressure to perform and transform in the middle of these forces. And these forces are shaping the future of supply and demand in ways that some ways are predictable, but other ways are unpredictable. You talked about VUCA on steroids earlier on, John. One example that I would like to talk about is the impacts of increasing climate change, the pandemic, and the social injustice. And the combination of all these forces, how they mandate companies to think and act in different ways. And companies these days must be committed more than any other time to tackle the environmental and societal threats that we face using science-based actions and supporting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And what does R&D? What's the role of R&D in this? R&D has a very important role to play and contribute to helping companies achieve their net zero ambitions as part of their broader sustainability goals. For instance, the role of R&D in a global CPG company is manifold, but particularly there are 3 areas where I think R&D plays a significant leadership and executional role, and that is in recipe optimization, in agriculture, climate smart agriculture, and packaging. And those 3 factors can play a significant role in achieving net zero as part of the broader sustainability umbrella. Earlier this year, I actually had the privilege to take part in a science group CTO forum, which involves 7 companies, and we co-authored a net zero playbook. It was an eye-opening experience to bring different companies together and creating something that resonated with all of us, and hopefully it will resonate with people who will access this playbook. I'd like to use the example of recipe optimization, which is not new to R&D. In the past, when we worked on recipes, we developed or optimized recipes based on the quality of the ingredients or a specific cost corresponding to a price point, or to bring more nutritional value. Nowadays, we need to do these quality, cost, nutrition, and at the same time, make sure that we minimize or optimize the environmental footprint. So how we source and qualify ingredients, how we go about new ingredient functionality, and how we formulate smartly are mission critical to renovate the core portfolio and innovate in the right way for the future. If we look at packaging and its relation to net zero, it is really about reducing the greenhouse gas emissions for creating the packaging materials. But the primary purpose, or the primary role rather, of packaging and sustainability is within the context of design for circularity, which is recyclability, reusability, and compostability. And this is an area that R&D is contributing to. But those two things, net zero and design for circularity, are interdependent. And switching from, let's say, plastic to paper may actually increase the footprint. So here you have a contradiction and you have a conflict and you need to solve it. So how would you solve it? This is where you need to find a number of solutions that will mitigate this issue. Solutions both regarding raw materials, the way that you structure your packaging, but also other requirements within the supply chain. And this is where an ambidextrous organization can come in, think out of the box, pivot and plan for resolving those contradictions and finding optimal solutions within the value chain.
It also brings you back to the point you made on leadership earlier, where we were talking about being a functional expert is not good enough anymore, right? It's also understanding the environment that you operate in and how it is changing, so you can anticipate and you can influence and you can lead. So there's one observation as you talk. The other one is I internalize very clearly again how simple my life was in let me 7 years ago. So I was part of doing some of this, and it was much more focus on quality and cost. Also, we need to go and leverage new technologies to go and help us in delivering on this much more complex need in an ambidextrous way. And that gets us to point number 2, which is how do you go and connect those traditional sciences, which I grew up with, into with the digital technology. And I know you worked on this back to your bio. This has been a priority of yours over the last year, so I'm sure you have some plenty insights to share.
Yes, indeed. And I share the sentiment that the world used to be a little more simple. We were really focusing on value, 1 or 2 dimensions of value. Now we have to think of value in multidimensional ways, but also we need to think about value and values.
Ooh, I like that. Let's let that sink in. We need to think in value and values. I'm going to use it in my class because, indeed, to your point, let me just go. And this is, I think, interesting. I hope the audience thinks too, and I hope you think. When in my class, I also teach innovation, and again, I also like definitions sometimes. And I say, innovation happens when you convert knowledge and inspiration into new value. And so the point on value is really important, but you need to understand what that value means. It's not only value for the consumer, otherwise if there's no value first, it's value for the consumer. Otherwise you don't have a business. It needs to be value for the company, otherwise you shouldn't be in the business. It needs to be value for your stakeholders and your supply and your partners, otherwise your business is not supportable. And it needs to produce value for society, otherwise your business is not sustainable. And so that's the way that I always talk about value and that broader role of innovation. But now you have a better summary. It is about value and values. Love it. Thank you. Any thoughts on my thoughts?
I agree with you, and I would like to focus a little on the speed of science and what it means for us. The speed of science, what we're experiencing today, is exponential. It's not linear anymore, and it will not be linear in the future. There are many different factors why science is moving so fast. There are questions, can we absorb all this science? What do we need to do to accelerate this absorption? But in the context of business, I'd like to pose two questions. How do we prioritize and apply fast scientific solutions to problems that the whole industry faces? And I'm talking here about pre-competitive solutions, vis-a-vis applying science to create value within an organization, and this is within a competitive context. How can we do both? Where can we do both? And how in this process of actually contributing pre-competitively and competitively in this process, we align and augment with societal values, where our consumers live, where they use our products and services. And looking into disruptive technology and the importance of the consumer and the ability of the consumer to respond to those innovations is something that we need to understand better. The old ways of working are good. They have served us very well, but they will not be sufficient in the future. And I would like to start with a provocation about how we do consumer-based innovation. Historically, we have used psychology-based methodologies to understand the consumer needs and then design products and services to satisfy these needs. It is about positioning, it's about the concept, it's about product concept fulfillment. But what if we started to think in a different way and using other scientific developments and capabilities outside of the strict domain of the functional expertise? For instance, with the huge advancements in neurobiology, what if we use the combined approach, neurobiology and psychology, for a deeper emotional connection and meaning, so that we can be closer to our consumers, particularly when it comes to unarticulated needs? Such a combination in conjunction with other disciplines, traditional disciplines, for instance, food safety or packaging science, could actually trigger a number of other innovations beyond a product or a service. We could see innovations, for instance, in ingredients, or innovations in packaging materials, innovations in how we design apps to reach our consumers. This whole notion of bringing together new and emerging scientific disciplines and combining them together to change the way that we approach consumer-based innovation is an area that has a huge, huge potential in the future. I would also like to talk about a couple of examples regarding user centricity. One example is about Halloween and celebrating Halloween in the very dark times of the first year of the pandemic in 2020. When it was not safe for the Halloween celebrations to go ahead as they have always been. The Mars Wrigley team partnered with the Mars Digital team, and they actively listened to consumer needs and concerns. People wanted to celebrate Halloween, but they did not want to go door to door. It was not safe. So the combined team developed a safe, COVID-friendly application to ensure that several popular brands were accessible to consumers in a user-friendly, fully social platform. And this obviously delighted the consumer and also helped drive sales, and doing it all in a safe, fun environment and allowing kids to celebrate Halloween. This is a great example of technology and social meaning coming together. Another example of user centricity is with vet services telemedicine, where you apply user centricity and together with traditional vet services, you can actually develop and improve telemedicine services to make a better world for pet and pet parents during times like the pandemic, where the face-to-face accessibility was not easy.
Okay, Maria, these are outstanding illustrations and examples. I'm sure people were hanging at your lips. It sounds great. I also, from a personal point of view, and you know where I play, again, as we talked in the first segment, I love your notion of we need to go and ensure that the new technologies, the new digital technology, but all new technologies are there to go and help humanity, drive humanity, and drive social impact, drive social meaning. So these stories are fantastic to illustrate that. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I think that is, as you've been elaborate, we can now go to number 3, which is talking a bit about the organization. We talked about the environment, we talked about science and technology, and how we apply it for social impact. How about agility in your organization? How have you designed that in your organization, and what lessons can you pass to our listeners?
Capabilities are about people, systems, and processes. People are indispensable in building agility, bringing agility to an organization. And agile R&D organizations are at the heart of innovation. So what do we mean by agile R&D organizations? There are organizations that break down the silos. They bring cross-functional teams together, interdisciplinary teams together, and emphasize collaboration, feedback, and learning. So what does it take to get us there? It takes a lot of different approaches in developing the people and team capabilities. I would like to start with the multiple generations in the workforce. And these generations, they bring their own strengths, but they also bring their own legacies and their own biases. We're talking about having analog and digital generations together. It is very important to create a diverse and inclusive environment where these generations can thrive, where their impact is greater than the sum of the parts. It's important to nurture and celebrate their diversity of thought. We talked about linear and non-linear creative thinkers. How do we make sure that they all feel that they belong, that they are connected, that they're appreciated, and they have the opportunities to thrive? And being systematic about the scientific disciplines that we need to perform and transform. If we need to go and hire new disciplines, let's dare to be the first in acquiring those out-of-the-box capabilities, the talent that is not part of the mainstream of our talent pool. It's very important to create an environment where people feel valued, where people belong, and where people thrive. And we do this by investing in those diverse and inclusive environments. The other aspect which is important is the science and business savvy, the combination of those two. In the first part of this podcast, we said that functional expertise, functional excellence is cost of entry. Indeed it is, but with the speed of science moving so fast, it is very important that the scientific and technological capabilities, we continue to upgrade and we continue to renew, we reskill and we upskill. And we combine this with the ability to respond to the business needs and respond to the needs really fast. So for instance, one example is, how do you balance a situation where a team is working on a non-competitive research project, while at the same time they see an opportunity to leverage this for a competitive advantage to address a specific business solution? It is possible to do both, but you have to be deliberate and you have to be intentional about identifying the end as opposed to defaulting to either or. And the last thing that I would like to highlight is how to combine rigor with speed. Speed is going fast in one direction. Rigor means you have to stop and do your due diligence. When you combine the two, you have agility. With speed, you take risks, but you need to balance this with the required rigor. Agile teams create better solutions and solve problems faster.
Cool. A few thoughts on your thoughts, if I may. I really like your earlier point where you talk about multi-generational talent. That's a level of diversity that we don't really talk a lot about. We talk about gender, we have our scorecards, and we talk about color and scorecards and nationalities and scorecards. Are we even thinking about combining indeed the strengths and also avoid the limitations, or at least internalize the real or be in touch with the limitations of each of the two generations or multiple generations, depending on how you slice it. So that's I find that's a very important point. That is an element of diversity, and then it again back to earlier conversation. You need to then work hard to include the diversity behind that clear purpose that you need. Let me see. The other thing I really enjoy and I really appreciated was this the point that you made around functional expertise. So far, we sort of talked. Yeah, that's the only point of entry, right? There's a level of entry that you have, so that's okay. But that's not okay, as you said. Science develops so quickly that you need to give learning. So that's not even a given. But even that is not enough, because then you need to apply the business and the environment element into it as well for you to be that thought leader and to be that influencer. And then indeed speed and agility, we also talked before, and that rigor. And here I think this back to the organization, you want the organization to operate in this way, but you also want them to go and elevate to the management and seek help in case they're not certain about the risk reward kind of balance that they need to strike. Don't think, everybody talks about delegating down, risk taking, right? Well, that depends on the level of risk. So seek help is what I have always told my organization in that sense. Great. These were three important points I was happy to reinforce. Anything on this point you want to still explain, or shall we go and get to the next question, which you know what it is, right?
I think, John, your points are really well taken. Reflecting on what we measure diversity, we need to start thinking broader. We need to start thinking about metrics or KPIs that they go beyond the toolkit that we have today, and find ways to articulate what success looks like for a multi-generational environment, what success looks like for thought or cognitive leadership. These are really great challenges to have. Yeah,
you can measure. You can only do what you measure, right? Or whatever the explanation is. This is a great final point on number 3 around developing an organization that is agile. Now, let me get to the next point. We're getting to the end of our podcast, which is, from your experience, having worked to establish this Ambidextrous organization, what have been the key challenges that you faced that people should be watchful for?
I think the first one is to clearly articulate the context. Without the context, the content can be very challenging, because we're introducing a lot of new concepts here. And certainly understanding the context, the broader context can actually facilitate more disruptive thinking. The second one is to actually have a vision and a purpose, and to make your vision and purpose real using the power of demonstration, like use cases. Not everything can be a big success overnight. But when you have that vision and purpose, you can work in a methodical, systematic way to prove, to inspire, and to grow. I think the power of demonstration is very important. And my last point is actually building new systems, building a new systematic approach on how we are going to create and and grow diverse teams in all aspects of diversity, which includes the thought and the diversity of thought and the diversity of scientific disciplines incorporating digital data, as well as other emerging scientific discoveries. So it is about, as I said, it is about the context, it's about the vision, and it is about the systematic approach to demonstrating, proving, and systematically developing the organization.
It's an excellent summary. I like to think in threes. You did it here. Inspiring. The one thing I want to push is the power of demonstration. It's very often that innovations don't see the light of day finally in the marketplace because we have some really great ideas. We just don't get the support, don't get the engagement from our leadership, from our multifunctional partners. And that can be very frustrating. And so the power of demonstration, I think, feeds in that or helps to resolve that, helps to address that. And for the listeners, if you want to learn more, we just did a report about 1.5 years ago now on how do you better communicate the value of your innovation. I think we came up with 3 strategies and 5 key skills. Find it on the conference board's website, communicating the value of innovation. Thank you for that summary, Maria. I work at the end of our podcast series of 2. I leave it to you for closing statements. What do you still want to reinforce to our audience?
First, I would like to thank you, John, and thank the conference board for the opportunity to do this podcast with you and with your audience. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I would like to leave you with a few keywords to carry forward: the power of an ambidextrous organization, the power of diversity, and ultimately the combination creating higher performance.
Focused as always. This is great. Thank you for those final thoughts. I won't ruin them by adding my own thoughts to yours. I just want to go and say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It's been wonderful to finally work with you after having our relationship continuing over LinkedIn after we met first time in Frankfurt. And I look forward to more into the future. Thank you for sharing all this to the members of the conference board and everybody else who listened, because this podcast is complimentary. And so thank you, Maria. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Audience, if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our Insights podcast series, or any other, by the way. You can explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the conference board by visiting our webcast at tcb.org/podcast. This was John Metzler. I look forward to hear you, not hear you, you hear me, whether you like it or not. Well, you can always switch me off. I look forward to engage with you in a next podcast or anywhere else. Reach out to us on the conference board website, on LinkedIn, and thank you for spending your time. Hope you found it valuable. Thank you.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.